I had dropped my faith in a higher power or God. Like you said, this is like hugging a cactus, and it's very confronting, owning those bits of self that are not easy to own.
Wanting to run away every given moment and stay with comfort zone. Why not drink and drug and fornicate and just enjoy the hedonistic existence? It's much easier.
You know, I guess after 58 years of doing that, I'd had enough fun, and I thought,
Get
well,
bored.
yeah, what else is there, you know? The next line
Yeah.
of cocaine isn't going to be any better than the previous 400, you know?
But in modern days, we want the man to do a bit more of the feminine, sharing of the load. And so we try our best to be loving, caring husbands, completely hijacked by our own biology and becoming quite aggressive. And indeed facilitates a lot of shame and guilt, almost like activating the trauma, the sense of inadequacy in me.
Can you affirm or acknowledge, Fred, that I'm wanting people to understand about why shadow work is a powerful tool, that if psychologists are not using it, maybe they could consider looking into it more deeply, and ought it be a part of conventional psychological practice? So my guest for today's episode has lectured at Bonn University and been a researcher in psychedelic therapy. He's currently completing his PhD in psychedelic research. He held a position as psychologist at the world's most prestigious private alcohol and drug treatment facility, the Sanctuary, here in Byron Bay. He travels around the world providing psychological services to private clients. He's also my personal therapist and clinical supervisor. Welcome, Micha.
Thank you, Pete. It's lovely to be here again.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. Today's topic's a little bit different to what I'm used to doing, but what I wanted to do was, for some reason, I felt compelled to share my own healing journey with people. And I haven't done that fully yet. I may have done it in part. And I couldn't think of a better person to maybe interview me and ask those questions that will pull out the nuggets, because I think there's something in me that I haven't shared yet that I want to share. And so I'm leaving it up to you to that out, and I'm just going to be as vulnerable as I can be. And the other thing about you is that, I really trust you over the years, and so I'm willing to go anywhere we need to go to pull out my healing journey. And my wish is that in sharing that, people may hear something for themselves, and that starts them on their healing journey. So thanks for being open to doing this.
Pleasure, and I must say it feels like honor and a privilege, and the feeling is very mutual. So let's see what happens here between us two.
Yeah, let's see what mischief we can get into.
Yeah. So I guess I would like to start in talking about the early chapter of your life. I often look at human beings and the existential lottery ticket between this dance between nature and nurture, and the software development, as I call it. What sort of nurture influences have you been exposed to? What sort of a family you were born to? And perhaps you can relate to the nature part of it too, how you see your parents and all that stuff. But I know that you were born into a big family, 9 kids.
7 kids.
7 kids, sorry. That's quite remarkable. 9 people. So perhaps you can talk about that a little bit.
I think that's a good place to start. And I like that you couched it in those terms, nature and nurture, because I tend to think mostly in terms of the nurturing, or in my case, what I see as lack of. But I think I also did come in with a personality, and I think that plays into how I responded to my early years. But my early years were quite impactful and shaped my life in ways that I do want to share. And I was, third child out of 7. My parents were quite young when they started having children. I think my mum was 18 and dad was 21 or something like this. So I think by the time my mum was 25, she had 7 kids. We weren't wealthy, we weren't poor, we were kind of, probably lower middle class. I was raised in Perth. My parents were quite devout Catholics, more so my dad than my mum, and my dad went to church every day, and then we'd go every Sunday, so Catholicism played a part in my upbringing. But I think the significant thing from my childhood that stands out was that my father in particular, he had a problem with alcohol, excuse me, And partly that's because we had his father had a family business that was producing alcohol. So we had a factory where we would bottle wines and spirits, and he would make his own liqueurs. And Dad was the salesman for that company. And so my father's job was to drink alcohol all day with publicans and people who own liquor stores to sell the product. So it was kind of occupational hazard, his drinking.
Yes.
And so he would come home most nights intoxicated. And with, you know, mum at home raising, you know, a lot of kids, she was under a lot of stress. She was quite young. And so Dad would come home and say, how were the children today? And she'd say, oh, they've been little rascals. And so then Dad thought the way to, you know, deal with that was he used corporal punishment. He believed that that's the way to raise an obedient child, is you punish the bad behaviour. So out would come the belt, you know, the leather strap. Sometimes he would ask us to go pick our own strap out of his collection of straps, you know, choose your torture device. I always went for the thinnest, lightest one. I don't know if that was the right choice. And then, you know, we would be belted, you know, me and my siblings. My siblings report consistently that they thought I copped the brunt of it out of all the siblings. I'm not particularly sure why that was, but I would say between the ages of about 5 and 15, I was belted several times a week consistently. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. It's hard to say, you know, it's not like I was there keeping a log, but it was pretty regular. And not only that, sometimes it wasn't just a controlled belting. Sometimes Dad would lose his temper and it would be, you know, punching or kicking or, you know, other, you know, kind of ways of physically manhandling. And then my mother, for about 3 years, she had developed a problem with alcohol as well. And eventually got out of it by going to AA. So she was only really troubled by alcohol for 3 years. But during those 3 years, I think I was around 8 years of age. And so she would sometimes bring the belt out as well. And I want to share a couple of stories around that.
Please.
One I remember in particular was it was a summer day, and so I didn't have a shirt on. I just had shorts, and I was on the back veranda of the house, and I can't remember what my behaviour was that warranted her rage, but she came out with the strap, and next thing I know, I'm up against the wall, and she's just wailing into me. And, you know, the leather belt's hitting my skin, and like it was hurting. And I remember looking up at her going, what's going on here? Why is she behaving this way? And as I looked up, I noticed that her eyes rolled back in her head a little bit. And I recognized that she wasn't fully present. She was in some kind of rage. She'd been triggered and kind of lost it. And at that point, something clicked inside of me and I dissociated because I couldn't feel the belt hitting me anymore. And it was more this kind of inquiry. Where's Mum go? Who's this person? And that sticks out. I remember that like it was yesterday. And there was another time, we were mischievous as kids. I'm not saying sometimes I wasn't naughty. I definitely, like, whatever you call naughty, I definitely acted out. And there was one time we were having a fight with the neighbours' kids, like a stone fight. So we were throwing stones across the fence and they'd throw the stones back. And we lived on a main highway, and I don't know if somebody called the police, but a policeman showed up and knocked on our door, and Mum answered the door, and she had a belt around her neck, a leather belt. And the policeman started to lecture my mum about how she wasn't, you know, managing her children's behaviour well, and that she needed to discipline her children because they were throwing stones. And my mum talks about this, and she kind of boasts about it. She looked at the cop in the eye and says, you don't tell me how to raise my children. He says, see this around my neck? This isn't a necklace. This is a belt, and I'm not scared to use it.
Yes.
And then the policeman got on his bike and drove off. But they're kind of two stories that stand out that remind me what my childhood was like. With 7 kids, my mum was always at the kitchen sink or at the stove or at the ironing board or in the laundry or vacuuming the house. So she had so many chores to do. And so there was no time for nurturing. I don't recall nurturing. I'm sure there must have been some. I just don't recall it. So when I look back at my childhood, the things that stand out for me significantly were the lack of nurturing. There was nowhere to go to when I was hurting inside. There was nowhere to go to when I was upset. And when I did go there, sometimes that was met clearly with that, these hurts aren't welcome. I'll share a little story about that. So there was the nowhere to go to when I was upset, but also a lot of times when I was getting belted, there was no correlation between punishment and the crime. Like, I'm like, what's this about? Like, I was playing outside. I'm dirty because I was playing outside in the yard. Does that warrant a belting? So that was the troubling bit. I've talked to people who said, look, my parents hit me, but I know I deserved it. People have told me that my parents hit me, but I deserved it.
Yes.
I would say 95%. I can't correlate the belting to the crime. So I'll tell another story that's quite compelling for what it was like for me. When I was about 9 years of age, I broke my arm. I was playing at a neighbour's place, fell over. I heard the crack, and I knew it was broken, even though I was only 9. And I ran home and holding my arm like this, and my mum was standing at the stove cooking dinner. I said, Mum, I've broken my arm. I was crying. I've broken my arm. And she didn't turn around because she was busy cooking dinner. She said, no, you haven't. Go away. Can't you see I'm busy? And I'm like, no, Mum, I've broken my arm. You need to look at it now. I said, go away, Peter. I'm busy. So I'm like, okay. So I went. I used to self-soothe. Whenever I was hurting, I would go in my room, lie on my bed, hold myself and just soothe myself. So I thought, okay, I'll do what I know to do. And so I laid down and, started swelling. The swelling was getting worse. The pain was getting worse. The bruising was starting to show up. And at some point I realized that I could no longer soothe myself. And I went in there one last time and I screamed. I'm like, Mum, my arm's broken. Finally, she turned around and she said, oh my dear, oh my God, we need to get you to the hospital. It was a big deformity there. And it was broken in two places. And so I only share that example because there's other examples like that where I felt I had nowhere to go to for comfort or nurture. The other one that I want to mention is when I was about 12 years of age, I had a strange thing happen to me where I had about a 6-month period of pretty severe acute insomnia that came out of nowhere, and I didn't really understand it. And the quality of it was I would, we were told to go to bed at 7:30, and then our parents stayed up maybe an hour or two later, and then all the lights were off in the house and everyone was in bed. And I would sometimes lay there knowing everyone else was asleep, but I was the only one awake. And I didn't like that. It felt a very lonely place. I was afraid of the dark. And I would attempt to go to sleep. And what would happen was there's a spot in between sleep and wakefulness. I think they call it the hypnagogic space or something like that, where you're not quite fully asleep and you're not fully awake either. And when I entered that space, attempting to go to sleep, the next thing I felt was that paralyzed. I went into this kind of sleep paralysis state, and it felt like the devil was trying to enter my body or had entered my body. And so I was laying there as a 12-year-old thinking, what the fuck is this? It feels like the devil's trying to get inside of me. And then, so that was, I didn't know what to do with that. I'd already had learned helplessness around going to my parents with, things that were distressing to me. But also my parents were devout Catholics. And I had this fear around, I can't go and tell them I think I've got the devil in me. What will they do with that? Am I going to have to go and have an exorcism or whatever was going on? But that went on for about 6 months. And every time I tried to go to sleep, sometimes I would go to sleep and then I'd wake up, like gasping with breath because I felt this devil trying to get into me again. And so for about 6 months, I might have been lucky to get 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night, and I'd still have to wake up or get up and go to school the next day. And I don't know what happened, but after about 6 months, that spontaneously subsided. But I remember that. I would lay there in bed sweating, praying for the sun to rise because of the horror and terror of this demonic. I don't know whether that was my own shadow. That's how I look at it now. But at the time, it felt like some evil, malevolent force wanting to mess with me. And so I guess that's where I want to start with. I don't know what's compelling in that story for you, but I felt alone. I felt alone even though I was in a big family. I couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand my parents' behaviour a lot of the time. From a very young age, I remember asking myself questions: what causes people to do the things they do? Why are my parents behaving this way? There's something wrong with this picture, and I don't think it's me. I remember saying these kind of things to myself. That just reminded me of one more thing I'd like to share. When I was young, I had brief psychic ability, what I think I would call a psychic ability, or I would have these premonitions. It happened a few times. I was walking to school one day with my brothers, and we were walking along the road, and there was a dog. And I said to my brothers, when we get to this next intersection, that dog's going to try and cross the road, and it's going to get run over and killed. I just said that. I don't know why I said that. I kind of like I saw it in my mind's eye. We walked another couple of 100 yards. The dog crossed the road, got run over and got killed. Okay, that was interesting. I don't know what to do with that information. So I just forgot about it. And then I don't know when the next example was, but I remember being in the car with my siblings and my mum was driving into town. And again, I had this premonition something was going to happen. And I said out aloud to my mum, when we get to this roundabout that's coming up, we're going to be sideswiped by a truck, but we're going to be okay. And I don't think anybody really paid attention. And then at the roundabout, sure enough, we were sideswiped by a truck, and we managed to. It didn't cause a big accident. And I remember my mum turning around and saying, "Stop saying those things." And I made a note to myself, whatever that is, I need to stop it. And it was only a couple of days afterwards, I remember looking at a plane in the sky. And I was looking at the plane and I thought to myself, I wonder what it'd be like if that plane crashed. And then I'm like, I've got to stop even thinking this stuff.
Yes.
And so I don't know what to make of that. They were things that did happen. And I don't know what that means, if anything. But I certainly had some sort of thing that was going on there. There was a phenomena that I can't explain. But there's something in me that's curious about what's going on behind the scenes of things, what causes people to do what they do. So I just want to start there, and I don't know what you can make of any of that.
There's a lot there to unpack. So I want to gather my thoughts for a second, but I'm curious as to, by all accounts, you're describing horrific levels of trauma. Something that in today's time and culture, you can just see the call to child services and the police and the incarceration of parents and the removal of the kids from families. Society is frowning upon that which was normalized so much back in the day. And so did you ever get answers as to why they behaved the way they behaved?
I'll jump ahead a bit, and we may come back, but at some point, I did go and get therapy. I was 24 when I first thought to do something about my situation. I didn't know it was called trauma back then. I just knew I was numb.
You learn to dissociate.
Oh, yeah.
And you learn to, I'm thinking about fight, flight, freeze, and the way a small child will be terrified constantly in his own household, and in the absence of any ability to either fight or fly, you're just left with what? Staying there, freezing. And that's why so many people with trauma learn to dissociate.
Yeah.
And emotional regulation as a child, as a teenager for you?
I remember my father saying things like, children are there to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Another thing he did was that he would belt us, and if we cried, he would say, when you stop crying, I'm going to come back and belt you some more. So I would just sit there pretending I was crying. And so there was, pretty soon I got the lesson, I got the message that my emotions were not a priority. And in fact, it doesn't serve me to have any feelings or emotions because they're only getting in the way. But my parents' feelings and emotions are paramount. And I did learn from a young age to put other people before myself because that was the message. And so I basically suppressed, I would say, all of my emotions. And, then I started to mask that with alcohol. So I followed my dad's, lead. And from the ages of about 18 to 21, I would write myself off 3 days a week with alcohol. And it was 24 when I recognized this was no longer serving me. And my mother had started doing some therapy with a psychologist. It was called self-awareness. And I noticed my mum changing. She was going off and doing this self-awareness stuff once a week. And I could see the changes in her. And I just felt numb to everything. My life was like a grey zone. No joy, no upset, no nothing. I was still going through the motions of life and wiping myself off with alcohol. And then I got into therapy at the age of 20, thinking it was some sort of self-awareness, but it was group psychotherapy with 2 clinical psychologists. And what drove me there was the greyness of life. I couldn't, it was unbearable, being numb. And that was the beginning of my healing journey.
Inspired by seeing your mum seeking healing?
Yeah. Mum first went to Alcoholics Anonymous to get off the alcohol. That was inspiring. And then after that, I think she met someone through AA who suggested she go and do this self-awareness course, which was group psychotherapy at a place called the Institute of Human Development in WA. And I was inspired by the change in Mum. And I said, I'm going to go do that too, not knowing what I was getting myself into. And interestingly, so when I applied for this psychotherapy, it was group psychotherapy, I was 24 and the next youngest person was 34. And so I was 10 years younger than anyone else in the group. And they weren't going to accept me into that group. That was the adult group. They were going to put me in a youth group because of my age. And then when they interviewed me, they said, "Oh no, I think we'll put you in the adult group." And so I went into that group, and I was in therapy for 2 years. I know I had complex PTSD now.
Yes,
I know I did. And even though I had 2 clinical psychologists working with me for 2 years, that was never diagnosed. I've also since discovered I also have ADD because I respond so well to the medicine, which I take occasionally. Most of the time I don't take it. And so I'm a bit disappointed in a way that those things weren't picked up and I maybe could have been treated earlier. And I ended up self-diagnosing and self-treating, and it worked wonderfully. Another thing that disappointed me about my therapy back then, and it was very well-meaning, what I did get out of 2 years of therapy was I got a place to finally access emotion. I got a place to cry. I got a place to scream. I got a place to find my rage. It was very cathartic. I had a place where it was okay to be emotional and I wasn't going to be punished for it. It was going to be welcome. And so I basically spent 2 years of catharsis and, just fear. I had a place to feel scared. I had a place where I was nurtured. So I got a lot out of it. Another disappointing part about the therapy was that after 2 years, I walked away with 4 unhelpful stories. My mum doesn't love me. My dad doesn't love me. I was abused and I'm damaged goods.
As a result, from the therapy,
I don't. Yes, definitely. That played into it because they said you were the reason you feel the way, or the reason you have no feeling, and now all this stuff is coming out is because you were abused.
Yes,
and maybe I made up the damaged goods tag, but pretty much the message I was getting was that, you're a mess because you were abused. And that I told myself my mum and dad didn't love me, but they certainly didn't correct that, nor did they challenge that story. Or
That
whatever.
it was their way of loving, their philosophy of bringing up kids, boundaried and so forth, in the spirit of the culture and the time.
Well, an interesting thing is that the clinical psychologists that I had, one was an ex-priest and the other one was an ex-nun in the
Right.
Catholic order that became clinical psychologists and then left the clergy
Right.
and opened this centre. So some of the way they practiced therapy, I imagine, would have been shaped by their religious beliefs. And I know, I think when I've talked to my dad about him belting me, he says, son, I know that was wrong now, but at the time I believed that the way to raise an obedient child was to punish the bad behaviour.
Yes.
And then you'll get less bad behaviour and more good behaviour. And so I don't think he was malevolent. I don't think he meant to cause me harm. So I've given up the story that it was abuse. But at the time, I walked away. And this is where they failed me in a way. They should have assessed where I was at after the 2 years and go, what stories are you still telling yourself? Because I was still in a big victim identity. Mum doesn't love me. Dad doesn't love me. I was abused and I'm damaged goods.
Yes.
That's not a successful treatment plan. And one of my criticisms of some ways of approaching therapy is that therapy focuses on the past, the painful past events, and the emotional fallout or consequences, the feelings and emotions from those painful events. And that seemed to be primarily what they were focusing on. And so when I would share my painful story and the feelings that go along with that, it was reinforced. Oh, you poor person. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, you had a horrible experience. And when they would say things like that, it would reinforce my painful story. And I think that's how I managed to walk out with those stories intact. They didn't address the victim identity that I was creating through telling myself those things or even them reinforcing those things. So the story that I was abused and that I was damaged was reinforced by the way my therapy was approached. And it wasn't helpful for me as a 45-year-old man when I finally realized that these were stories. It wasn't helpful for me to see myself as damaged goods. It wasn't helpful for me to see myself as abused. And it wasn't helpful for me to have stories that mum didn't love me and dad didn't love me, because those stories created my victim identity. And so they were very well-meaning, I believe, in the way they approached my therapy. They gave me a place to vent and cathart. They didn't pick up my complex PTSD diagnosis.
Yes.
And they let me walk away a victim still. And so, look, I'm not criticizing all therapists, all of psychology, but these are people with PhDs in clinical psychology. And, this is about 40 years ago. Maybe they do things a bit differently now. I don't know. So, yeah, I'll park it there for a bit and see what you want to pull out of that.
The part that stood out for me is your conversation with your dad, his apology, and also him giving context that, the road to hell was full of good intentions. And so cause and effect, when I look at the emotional ignorance torch passed on sometimes from generation to generation, and I know it was definitely, when you look at times like Second World War, times where things were hard, maybe there was not enough food, maybe it was hard going, war zones and whatnot, you often saw that type of upbringing mentality. And in their minds, really they were doing the right thing. And also in their minds, that's what they have learned too from their parents. So when you talk about parenting, role modeling, mirroring, and showing a child how to navigate their emotional regulation, how to learn emotional regulation. And basically, that's our first point of reference. We see it in them. So many thoughts came up when you spoke about this, because I think, alcohol does lower the threshold for aggression. It is often destroying families in so many nasty ways. And it made me think about how sometimes our parents were super anxious and they didn't pay attention. No, maybe they were not even aware how anxious they were, because they were always fueling it, or numbing it more correctly, medicating it with alcohol. But alcohol, as soon as it fades from the system, or if you drink too much, definitely there's an aggravation of people do sometimes respond aggressively on it. So when you combine that with culture and norms, it is very easy to see suddenly the picture where violence is accepted, violence is normalized, tough love and whatnot. And I've worked with many people that have actually, these days the complaint is to the other side. Yeah, they go to the other side, they overcompensate, and they raise kids with no boundaries, and everything goes. And so how do we find that middle ground where raising a child who knows how to regulate their emotions, who knows how to delay gratifications, who knows how to deal with anxiety or sadness? I think we talked about it in the last podcast, how important it is to learn to regulate our own feelings. So when you don't have it, and when it's filled with violence, then we too are dissociative, anxious, dysregulated, and often self-medicating. And so what you're talking about is a journey of healing in which I guess you had to go through these stages. Perhaps where first there is the anger or the disappointment or the victim or anything that goes with it, it's only slowly with maturity and wisdom accumulated through suffering that you find your way in making more sense out of it in a way that doesn't keep you trapped, I guess, in more suffering.
Hey men, isn't it time you took your lovemaking to mastery level? Are you ready to impress your intimate partner and leave her fully satisfied yet wanting more? My Sexual Samurai program is designed to put you back in control of your sexual energy. Imagine being able to generate your full sexual potential, sustain it, and then direct it at will. In just a few weeks of disciplined practice, you'll master voluntary control over your sexual orgasm. You'll also learn how to integrate the hidden aspects of your sexual shadow, empowering you to step into your full masculine archetype. Whether your problem is performance anxiety, premature ejaculation, or low libido, or you're just wanting to step into your full masculine, my Sexual Samurai program is for you. Head to the Shadow Work Academy via my website or check out the show notes for more information. Yeah, thanks. I want to speak to your point around, you mentioned World War II and the generation. My father's father came out on a boat from Italy, I think in 1937 or something like that. He was imprisoned in a prisoner of war, like a detainment camp in Australia.
Yes.
Because I think Italy was on the side of Hitler in Germany during the war, and so Italians were considered a threat. And so my grandfather spent 3 years detained in a prisoner of war camp. And so he had hard times. And so I'm sure those hard times were passed on to my dad, and then, the generational trauma gets passed down the line. And so
PTSD to the bone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely dug into that, and I understand that. And look, there's a lot of me that's forgiving. And, my father and I, we talk on the phone regularly, and I've forgiven him for a lot of, what I received from him as a child. I had this recent thought recently. I had this thought, and I'd like your opinion on it. I don't feel fully resolved with my mum and father, and I'll explain why. And I definitely wanted to forgive them because I knew that carrying the resentment and the stones in my own heart was punishing me. And so I did this work in my 30s and 40s, and I confronted them about what I was unhappy about with my childhood and their parenting. And I gave them verbal sprays and let them know in no uncertain terms how I felt about my childhood. to a point where they were able to recognize the hurt in me and acknowledge it. And so at that point, I forgave them, and we've had pretty decent relationships ever since. But there's one part in me I just recognized I don't feel fully absolved or atoned or whatever it is I'm looking for, because and they both have said to me, they gave the same justification or explanation. We did the best we could. I don't know what to do with that. I want to believe they did the best they could. I want to believe that, because if I do, then I feel I can let go of it a bit more. But when I look at that, I'm like, really? That's the best? What's your worst look like? What do you mean that's the best? What, drinking every day, coming home, you're battering your kids and repeating that over and over? I would prefer, they said something like, they were stressful times. We tried to be the best parents we could. We know we failed at times, and I really want to give you the space to, because I need to hear the impact of my parenting on you. I want to hear the deepness of the totality of it, the fullness of it from your experience, because I want to know the consequences of my actions on you as your truthful experience. I wanted some sort of grace from them so that I could at least say, this is what it was like for me when, I couldn't sleep for 6 months because I thought I was possessed by the devil. This is what it was like to be belted and have nowhere to go. I just wanted some, I feel they could have been more generous than just say that's the best we could have done. If they had said, look, that's the best we could have been done, and if you need time and my space and my ears and my listening to share with me the full impact of my parenting, I would have loved that opportunity. It may still be there. I haven't brought this up because it's a recent thing. So am I asking too much, or do I just need to ask this? Should I accept they did the best they could and move on? Or should I ask for, they're both in their 80s now. Mum's 85, Dad's 88. And I know that for them, because they've got 7 siblings, we've all come to them with what we weren't happy about. And they're at the end of their life now. Can I do this another way other than needing their cooperation with it? But I just want to speak to that in terms of, it's a nagging thing in me where I feel that I would have liked the opportunity to deeply share the impact of their behaviour on me. That's the missing piece for me. Does that make sense to you?
100%. I mean, when you spoke before, I think you did mention some level of recognition from your dad, right? Where he said something along the lines of, it was wrong, I accept it, it was the time, it was the culture, and perhaps I could have done it differently other than violence. But when you say, is that too much to ask? I think, are they capable of doing that? Because the thing you're seeking for requires deep work. And what is that type of work we're talking about? Whether you look psychotherapy or all mental health services, we're talking about confronting, I guess, our own egoic defenses and growing in awareness. And you mentioned identity. So I found that many of those so-called tough men, they have a very formalized sense of identity where, for example, just boys don't cry and men don't talk emotions in fear that their balls might fall off, or they're just seeing that as a real serious threat to their sense of identity. And so as soon as you scratch the surface with emotions, it's not received well. Often it's not received well. I've seen it in my family too. And so the question is, are they capable? Is your dad capable? Has he done that type of work? Because I know for a fact that you have. quite a bit of it.
Yeah.
In so many ways, not just psychotherapy, stuff that we can talk about soon, but I guess I'm saying he's not there. And I'm wondering his capacity to do so.
Thank you for asking that question, because yeah, I agree. I didn't think to ask myself that question, and it's the perfect question. I would say neither mum nor dad has the capacity to go there, because I think their own defenses would come up, and that's what I recognized when I did go. It's like, please don't make me have this conversation again. It's a painful conversation. I don't want to think about how I failed as a parent. I want to get on with my life and enjoy the rest of my life. That's kind of the message I got. And so where I'm willing to go in terms of confronting the dark or the shadowy aspects of self, I think they probably not willing to go there, or incapable, or, don't have the capacity. And so I think I'm happy to acknowledge that they are probably incapable of providing for me what I would like from them. And so I'll think about alternative ways of processing that desire to have that. Yeah, it's easy for me to let that go, knowing that they're incapable of it. If they were capable of it, then I would probably push for it, because it would be absolving of me to be able to have that. But I don't think either of them want to or could go there.
Yes. And also the biggest question would be, what would be the intention behind it? Are we trying to find resolution within us? Can resolution only be found through mutual recognition? Many people haven't had the chance to talk to their parents like that, and they just passed on.
Yeah, right.
And they were left with all of this. So then we're left with that saying that anger is a poison that I drink, and I hope that someone else will get hurt. And so even after parents pass away, we want to be resolved within ourselves. Trauma is not what happened to us, as Gabor Mate say. It's what's happening now in our lives now. And if that's the intention behind seeking resolution, then perhaps there's other ways of finding it, rather than them, asking forgiveness, recognizing all the mistakes and so forth, and communicating in a very aware and present way. You just reminded me that I've seen it a few times in therapy, that it really, really, there's a lot of emotional charge that they're not willing to engage with. When I did that with my parents, I actually got alarmed how fragile they became, and it was old age, and it still is. And I don't know, it didn't sit well.
Yeah.
To go and seek it, that type of interaction and communication and level of awareness and presence, it just felt like almost cruel, almost punishing.
Oh yeah, I certainly don't want to do it for that. I don't. When I had this thought, had this interesting thought come to me, where we could create a new custom in our culture, where at the age of 16 or 17, we pick an age, and it's a parental atonement custom. And so if your parents have children at 16, maybe it's their 16th birthday, you say, we have this custom in our culture where we as parents come to you and to atone for where we may have failed you in our role of a parent. And we want to give you an opportunity to voice anything inside you that's incomplete, unresolved, unreconciled in terms of how we've showed up in our roles and responsibility of parents. And we're doing this because we want to provide you an opportunity to set the record straight, so that you're not moving forward from here with unfinished business, because it's at an age now where we've got you to adulthood. Maybe you do when they're 18. You're an adult now, and we're setting you free. You now have your own rights, and it's been our responsibility to get to this age. We'd like to atone or acknowledge where we've failed you and give you an opportunity to share with us so that we get to understand the impact of our parenting on you at a deeper level and do our own healing around that. But potentially it may be healing for you too. Now, that may be a wacky, crazy idea. I have no idea, but it came to me. We have all these other silly cultures or customs, but I thought that would be a cool one to introduce. What are your thoughts?
Definitely, in modern society, we are neglecting way too often the rites of passage, the ceremonial stuff that helps with that kind of healing. If I look at the church in Brazil, the Santa Daime, how you can see a grandfather, a father, and a son regularly taking ayahuasca together in their church. And I often thought, what sort of connection does this facilitate? Do we then learn to forgive? I know I'm definitely talking to my kids often about, being far from perfect, making lots of mistakes, and I guess I'm flushing it as we go. And those so-called parental mistakes that we all do, because it's like, raising kids doesn't come with a manual like building a house or something. It's again what you described: a traumatized young man, a traumatized boy, grows up to be a traumatized young man, detached and removed from his emotional experiences. He's now self-medicating, and he's often dissociating. As he becomes more and more mature, he's realizing that this is a problem. And one of the first places we get to see that is in our own intimacy, in our own intimate relationships with others, the world, and so forth. And so then we start, those who are willing, start the work. But again, the idea is that if I'm full of rage, if I'm constantly responding from a wounded space to my loved ones, and I can see clearly the damage that it's causing, then how do I come to terms with that, and how do I process that? Whether my parents are willing or not, because I have seen also many parents who will go, "What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah.
We did a fantastic job."
Yeah.
And by the way, you should raise your kids a little bit more like that, because they're way too spoiled, They still hold on to this so-called manual of raising kids. Is forgiveness all about us human beings sometimes just stumbling in the darkness when it comes to how is it what's worthy of a way of living and how to raise kids? Is forgiveness is walking a mile in their shoes and compassion and seeing how traumatized they were as individuals, as kids, and that back in the day, if you had to go and find food and shelter, you didn't really, and psychology didn't exist for many of them, None of that stuff. Also, it made me think about awareness. Is awareness a collective issue? Like, try and watch a movie from the 1940s, a Westerner, and you would look at it today and you go, well, that's a joke. I can't believe people fell for that, or even from the 1980s.
Yeah.
And so what is it about collective consciousness and collective awareness growing and learning? It's like it's consciousness observing itself all the time and says, well, this is not good. We should find another way.
I like that. I like the picture you're painting there, that in terms of an evolving consciousness, that my mum and dad did do the best they could to evolve their consciousness. And as I'm their offspring, and if consciousness is expanding, I get the benefits of, where they were at, their consciousness or the collective hadn't expanded that far. So that's maybe why they're incapable of that deep self-reflection and even thinking to say, yeah, here, take as much time as you need to tell me how much I hurt you.
Correct.
But now that's a part of my consciousness. And even you say you're doing that, you're drip feeding that into your children, that you won't have to do it when they're 18 because you've been doing that along the way. And maybe we don't need a custom at 18. Maybe that's the way to do it, and take responsibility for your mistakes as a parent in real time as they're happening. And I certainly, that's something, I've got a 6-month-old daughter there. I'm already making a few mistakes. Not many, but I'm sure I'm making a couple. And I definitely want to take responsibility for them and own them with her, because I know what it's been like for me to not feel heard about what didn't work for me in terms of my parenting. So I want my child to be able to communicate to me what didn't work about some of my parenting with them. I think maybe my consciousness has expanded to that point where I see that as a positive, and we don't know. I guess we don't know where the consciousness, what's the next level of conscious expansion in regard to that.
Well, isn't the fact that you do not have a leather belt around your neck as an educational tool a sign and an indication of your healing? Isn't it that your mom actually going to a support group, an AA, and not drinking is her best attempt at growing in awareness?
Modeling that to me, giving me an example.
Correct. And I often think, indeed, like psychedelics, this interplay between embodied self, ego, with all its colors and defenses, with all the imprints and the influences of nurture that we have, and then we take psychedelics and our sense of self dissolves, and we're able to step outside and look in and see everything, including them, including their influences, and start making more sense out of it. When you look at nature, I think that boundaries, and sometimes even punitive boundaries, are abundant, right? In the animal kingdom, you see Mama Bear saying, you better walk fast. If you don't walk fast, you see Daddy Bear over there, he's coming to get you. And it's hard to get our heads around that, but often there will be some sort of a smacking in the animal kingdom when life is at risk.
Yeah.
And they do it once, and the child and the offspring remembers well, and therefore stays alive. So some of these boundaries, it's like now I'm hearing this resistance, especially in the masculine energy. There's overemphasizing the child psychology and the child sensitivity, and there's lack of boundaries. It's as if, again, as a collective, we're overcompensating to the other side, and now you see this correction happening, right? Including men who want to be reconnected with their masculine side.
Yeah.
And so, once again, stumbling in the dark, trying to find our way, and never knowing how my egoic defenses are going to meet my partner's egoic defenses, and how the sacred marriage between them two is going to influence our child. So are we going to make mistakes? 100%, all the time. But I love your idea that ceremonial stuff is important. We should do more of that, whether it's birthdays or whatnot. I'm a great believer in the form of like writing letters. Because I think during conversations, it's very easy for the ego to be quite a stubborn donkey and come up and, defensive and all that. But when you write letters, you allow people the time to reflect and contemplate past the initial trigger of the emotional triggers. And perhaps we need to learn to write letters to our kids or books about our lives, explaining who we are. I think it's a big mystery for us. Why did Dad behave the way he behaved? I know that I definitely went to study psychology for similar reasons. I was very curious about humans' behavior, and I was bullied, and I was very curious about why people can sometimes be so bloody aggressive and hateful and violent and cruel. And so to a child, most certainly you don't have the vocabulary to think, yeah, I guess the belt is about education. Bring it on. I need to be a better man. No, a child just hates the pain and the suffering and the misery that comes with it.
I think, the point you made there, just, shed a bit more light on it for me, because, it's easy for me to make my dad to be the villain and the bully. And, I could make a case for that. And, but then, I shared this with you. I remember when Audrey, my daughter, was younger, I had this horrifying moment when she wouldn't stop crying. She was inconsolable. And I had this urge to shake her, and it caught me by surprise that I would have this aggressive, mean-spirited feeling or emotion towards an 8-week-old little girl. And I was horrified and I sobbed and I went into a deep shame spiral.
Yes.
And so recognizing there's a bully in me
Yes.
is redeeming in accepting the bully in my dad. And this is how I reconcile that, because, you know, I've done a lot of work with my shadow, and what it's taught me is that, you know, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of all of us, and we're all got an angel and a monster in there. And I can be a bully, and I have been a bully at least once or twice in my life. And, you know, saw that bully in me come out when pushed, you know, with a new challenge. And so that's already softened. That's already softened the need for Dad to explain or to hear me explain my hurts from him being a bully. It's owning it in me, because it's easy for me to say, oh, he's a bigger bully than I am, or he's a bigger bully than I'll ever be.
Yeah.
But that's just my ego. And then the ego wants more, so I want him to fully understand how much he hurt me and to what end, really. And I'm seeing now that managing that in me is where I get my redemption. Seeing the bully in me, and not letting that bully off the leash.
It's a painful thing, isn't it?
It's okay to have a bully if you discipline that bully. And that's why I think martial arts are great.
Yes.
And we're going to put our daughter into jiu-jitsu when she's 3, because I want her to learn that there's aggression in all of us, but to have discipline around that aggression. And I think my father lacked discipline in terms of his aggression. And like you said, alcohol's a great disinhibitor. But yeah, look, this is turning into a therapy session as much as it is a podcast, because I'm recognizing that through this conversation, I'm letting go of that need for parental atonement, or that's the term I call it. But it's not saying that I won't provide that to my child, in that I want my child to be able to come to me and go, you know, I wasn't happy about this, or this was the impact of your behavior when you acted this way on me, and I'm just coming to let you know what it's been like for me. I'm like, I'd consider that a gift, and I would like to own that. But as you were saying before, I think maybe through the work I've done, or just through generations or the expanding consciousness, I've got to this level where I'm ready and willing to do that, and it's not a threat. I don't see that as a threat to my ego.
Yes. It's quite a painful thing to see ourselves suddenly acting, behaving, and even using like using words and phrases that we used to hear at home. I mean, I used to get mortified. It's like, wow, as a reflection, there is my dad, and I'm acting and sounding exactly like him. It's like that nasty programming. But I want to say something very important about, about that stuff you mentioned about wanting to shake a baby. Because many years ago, I was fortunate enough to find myself in a unique initiative, government initiative, to provide support groups for postnatal depression groups in men.
Oh, wow.
Often stuff that is not looked at, yeah? Because mom definitely hormonally and otherwise can experience that. Dad gets super anxious being in the provider role and all that kind of stuff. And now you have these two highly aggravated emotional systems trying to raise a child. And I thought about that limbic system of ours, the fight or flight response again comes up for me, the amygdala hijack, as we call it. And I go back in history and in evolution, and I go back to cave days. And I'm thinking about a crying baby and how much it represented the threat to the whole tribe, calling all the predators around in the middle of the night, crying in a cave, and how we get triggered with fight, flight, freeze. And as you know, it hijacks the brain. That's why we call it the amygdala hijack. So the ability to think straight is gone. And indeed, that aggression, by the way, you see it the same in airplanes. Yeah. When we're feeling trapped in a little cave and a baby suddenly starts to scream, how uncomfortable, to say the least, everyone gets. And the number of parents who told me the same is remarkable. You know, like the guilt and the shame from being able to shake the baby and go, shut up already. And when you add it up to 3 sleepless nights, tensions with your wife, and so many other things, perhaps a few more kids, like let's try 7, running around, and you go, of course, there's a recipe here that activates that limbic system and that amygdala all the time, and that's where we respond from. Now, if I add on to that an already traumatized individual who has chronically activated their amygdala, the neuroplasticity over there is vast and active and chronically inflamed, then you can see very easily why some parents will tend to respond more aggressively than others. And perhaps here too, gender does count. You know, the way our brains are wired slightly different, and the limbic system in women and their ability to nurture, to hold space, to comfort is perhaps very different to the hunter.
Yeah.
But in modern days, we want the man to do a bit more of the feminine kind of sharing of the load. And so we try our best to be loving, caring husbands, completely hijacked by our own biology and becoming quite aggressive. And indeed facilitates a lot of shame and guilt, almost like activating the trauma, the sense of inadequacy in me.
I had a good conversation with a friend of mine the other day. He's actually a counsellor. I was making, I think it was a mistake of giving too much time to my child, because I've got a business that requires a lot of my time. And I've always feel pulled between my 2 babies, my business and my daughter.
You go hunting.
Yeah, I'm meant to go hunting. And then I'm like, well, I want to support my partner because I see the heavy load that the woman has, the mother, 24/7. I'm like, well, every chance I get, I want to go relieve her stress but also be with my daughter. And I was overcompensating by being too much in that role of child nurturer and carer. When I say too much, I was feeling anxious and agitated because it was pulling time from my business. And my role as a father is to make sure I can provide safety, security, and protection for my partner, for the whole family. And I was getting really agitated, and I spoke to my friend Andrew. He said to me, it was great, he says, your child doesn't need 2 mothers. She needs a mother and a father.
Yeah.
And the mother's the primary nurturer. That doesn't mean you can't nurture.
Yes.
And you're a natural nurturer. But you need to be providing, and that ought to be your priority. And so that helped me not feel guilty for spending more time at my desk.
Yes.
And so that was to bring some balance to that. Was useful.
And if you look at the different energies we emit, right? For us to raise a resilient child is often to send out, like go and face life's challenges. Whereas mothers are really wired into their sense of providing safety is to collect back and hug and nurture and avoid danger. Yeah. Mama goose. And so, and how many times you see that tension between couples, right? The child falls, mom goes and runs and wants to protect the child, and dad goes, come on, leave it alone, it's nothing, he needs to learn, they need to learn, and then they start fighting at each other as if they're meant to have the same type of framework for parenthood. And I know these are very confusing times with gender identities, but in all fairness, both are necessary. Both of these energies are very necessary to raise a human being that can protect themselves and survive.
Yeah, we don't prepare them for life by wrapping them up in cotton wool.
No, and that's also, so that links to, going back to being raised with trauma, how do you see this, the impact on you and your life, and how do you see suffering playing a role in you becoming who you are today?
Yeah, early on, I didn't make the connection, but the symptoms, when I look back and I see what were the signs or symptoms that I had PTSD, and I would bite my nails, like chronically, like really bad for years. And also my leg used to be going, psychomotor agitation.
Yes.
And I had that really bad for a long time. I didn't have a name for it, anxiety, psychomotor agitation, whatever. I just knew, how come everyone doesn't do this? I mentioned the insomnia that I had.
Yeah.
I had really bad acne. Maybe that was just a hormonal thing. I did have migraine headaches for about from 12 till about 30, so about 18 years. I had debilitating migraines. I would actually go blind, not 100% blind, but maybe 90% blind. I would go paralyzed, like down the left side. Even when I tried to talk, my tongue was more like I was having a minor stroke, but they were just severe migraine headaches. And I didn't know why I was getting them. But I remember it was when I was doing primal therapy in California, I really got deeply into my rage and anger towards my father. And when I fully expressed that, the migraines went away. So I believe my migraine headaches were related to unprocessed anger and rage towards my father. And so what other symptoms did I have? They were the main ones: insomnia, psychomotor agitation, migraines. They were the physical manifestations that I look back now and go, oh, they're consistent with someone who's got PTSD.
And I mean, just
hypervigilance, alcoholism, anxious. I was quite an anxious boy and still occasionally feel anxiety. And then the other thing you mentioned was dissociation. Dissociations come in and out of my life at different times. When I'm under a really stressful experience, I can dissociate. I feel myself like leaving my body or not wanting to be in my body. But I manage that pretty well.
Yeah. And when I listen to you, I go, what an extreme level of distress, right? The whole experience is dissociated. The nervous system responds. I mean, we talk about healthy bodies and healthy minds, so the nourishment we give our kids is food. But what happens to the emotional, psychological, spiritual nourishment when it is so off and your body is screaming, screaming with distress, manifesting all sorts of problems, neurological and otherwise. And I'm not saying it's the only reason why we're seeing more of neurological problems these days, because environmental factors cannot be excluded, toxins and whatnot, but definitely, like startle and heightened anxiety and all sorts of manifestations of high stress and compromised immune systems were your way of communicating how much you were suffering.
Yeah. And interestingly, so in my 40s, I was maybe about 45, I went and did something called Landmark Education. Some people may be familiar with it. And it was a life-changing moment for me. And there's 150 people in the room doing a 3-day seminar, and I was still suffering. Not physically, I was suffering emotionally and psychologically. And so I'd heard about this thing, so I went off there, and you give them the list of intentions that you're wanting to get from this program, and I had no idea what I was going to. And so I remember there was an opportunity to get up in front of everybody on the stage with the coach. They're not psychologists, they're coaches. I'm actually a coach now, and the reason I'm a coach now is some of what I got from this experience. So I remember getting up on the stage, and the guy, his name was Paul. Paul said, "Peter, what are you up here for? What's the source of your suffering?" And I remember saying, "Oh, I'm here because my dad abused me." And he said, rubbish. That never happened. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was with someone who understood me, but I didn't know why.
Interesting.
Yeah, he goes, rubbish, that never happened.
You didn't react with,
No.
how dare you?
No, I was like curious as all hell. I'm like,
Why would he say that?
yeah, like, and I can't, there's nowhere to run. I'm already up there in front of 150 people. He goes, that's a story. Your abuse is a story.
What do you think about it now?
He was right.
In what way?
So he drew two circles on the board in front of everybody. He said, what happened? I said, I just told you my dad abused me. He goes, no, that's a story. What actually happened? Give me the data. I want facts. What happened? I said, well, my dad belted me several times a week for 10 years. So he wrote that in the first circle. He goes, yep. He goes, I accept that. That's data. That's factual. If we had a camera, we could film that and we would still have that film. That did happen. And then above the other circle, he wrote, what did you make that mean? I said, I made that mean that my dad didn't love me. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh. And so he said, which side of the board is the suffering? And I saw straight away, as a 45-year-old man, I'm still walking around with the story that my dad didn't love me.
Mm.
That was where my suffering
Yes.
was. As Gabor Mate says,
Yes.
your trauma's not what happened to you, it's what's going on inside of you now because of what happened.
Yes.
Dad stopped hitting me 30 years prior to that.
That's right. The event has stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where my suffering was in my story,
Yes.
that my dad didn't love me.
Damaged good, inadequate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he said, there's only one person who knows if your dad loves you or not. Who's that? I said, my dad? He goes, that's right. He's the only one who can tell you. He says, have you ever asked him? I said, no, I haven't. He goes, you got your phone on you? I said, yeah. He goes, well, call him. I'm like, now? Yeah. In front of everybody? Yeah.
Wow.
Call your dad. Ask him. So I call my dad. He picks up.
In front of everyone.
Yeah. I call him. And I say, Dad, do you love me? Have you been drinking, son? was the first thing he said.
Yeah.
I said, no, Dad, I'm doing a seminar. He goes, of course I love you, son. I've always loved you. And, that's when I said, well, what were all the beltings about? He goes, son, I know that was not the right thing to do, but that was the way I was raised and that's the way I was taught. And I thought I was doing the right thing. And I'm sorry that was I shouldn't have done that, but I've always loved you.
Mm.
Thank you, Dad. And I got off the phone. And then he said, who told you your dad didn't love you? I said, nobody. I said, I made that up. He goes, that's right. He goes, you made up a story that your dad didn't love you, and now you know it's not true. And it's your story, and it's causing you suffering. What do you want to do with it?
And in that moment?
In that moment, a light bulb went off, and I realized that all my suffering was in the story that I made up about what happened to me. And it was my story. I could do what I want with it.
Yeah.
So in that moment, I dropped that story that my dad didn't love me, and I dropped the story that I was abused, and I dropped the story that I was damaged goods.
Which is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a remarkable thing because it's so easy to see the pathway in which we will go. Every time the belt hit me, I'm feeling like I'm totally in the wrong, done something wrong, or just
What's wrong with
me as me is just inadequate, not
Yeah.
good enough. And we carry that story and we go with that story. But that was definitely not the intention from Dad.
Yeah. Are you curious about how working with your shadow can improve your life and your relationships? Every Tuesday night at 6 p.m, I host a confidential live Q&A call where you can ask questions, access resources, and receive personal coaching from me. I have so many people come to me ready to do their shadow work, but they tell me they just can't afford the financial investment of one of my programs. So, to make professional shadow work accessible to as many of you as possible, I've created the Shadow Work Academy. The Academy is an online space where you get instant access to my inspired community of like-minded individuals doing the work and taking full responsibility for their lives. You'll have the opportunity to hear other members' stories and share your own. Within the community, you can post your questions, challenges and breakthroughs, as well as seek professional support and guidance from me personally on the live weekly call. Within the Academy, you'll also find my men's sexual mastery course called The Sexual Samurai and my introductory level shadow work course, Shadowboxing Level 1. Access to the Academy is 100% free until December 24. If you join before then, your access will be free for life. And so, I'm a therapist. I do trauma therapy with people. I'm a counsellor. I do counselling as well. And this weaves back to the point I was making earlier that, in terms of therapy and the therapy that I had and the counselling I had, they were looking at what were the negative events in my life and what was the emotional fallout from that. And they got me to express all that hurt and pain from those terrible things that happened to me. And in that, for me, it reinforced my sad story and kept it alive till I was 45. And so where therapy failed me, this coaching approach got me to where I needed and wanted to be by not using a poor me reinforcing the sad story approach, but challenging the story that I made up about what happened to me. And I took my power back in that moment. And so that's why now, although I can do therapy and counselling with people and do that when it's called for, I much prefer to take a coaching approach with people and look at where are you now and where would you like to be and what's preventing you from being where you are. And when I'm coaching people, things from the past come up, but I don't make that the focus. And I ask them to look at what are the self-limiting beliefs or what are the stories that they've created about their past that's preventing them moving forward with their life. And so, the type of coaching I do is I use shadow work as my methodology. And so for me, the shadow is just the parts of me that are hidden. Anything that's hidden by me by definition is shadow. If I could see it, it's not shadow. And so some of my self-limiting beliefs I couldn't see. I couldn't see that I was carrying a story that I wasn't loved and that was causing my pain and my suffering because that was in my shadow. So all this guy did was help me see something that I couldn't see, that when I could see it and bring it out of the shadow into the light of day, it transformed something inside of me. And since then I've been on this whole journey of, well, what else is hiding from me in my shadows? And I've spent a decade now looking for my addictions, the things I feel shame and guilt around, the things I don't want people to know about me, my resentments, my projections, my judgments of others, all those things. And this has been a big part of my healing. And in fact, we've skipped ahead a little bit because I've left out some other modalities that I've used. But I've found the biggest transformation has occurred for me since I did deep shadow work and embraced all the things about me that I was rejecting, denying, suppressing, had given up on, was avoiding, not wanting to face, not wanting to confront, all the parts about me that don't work. And even though I'd done psychotherapy, then yoga and meditation for 12 years, then some coaching, then 12 years of psychedelics, plant medicines, all looking for deeper healing. And the thing that transformed me the most was when I started my shadow work and confronting those bits of me that I hadn't yet confronted. And that actually started with that conversation with that guy. When he showed me that, and my trauma's not what happened to me, but what's happening inside of me now because of what happened. What happened to me, that's out in the light of day, but that's not getting the job done. What I needed to confront was the stuff I couldn't see about what happened to me. So Gabor Mate is right. What's happening inside of me now because of what happened? That I can't change what happened in the past, but I can work with what's going on inside of me now because of what happened. And so it's the consequences of the trauma. How's that impacting me now that I can't see? That if I was to confront those bits and want to look at them and want to reveal them, I can now manage them and do something about them. And through my own deep process of confronting those shadows, I've transformed my life from being chronically non-committal in relationship, prone to addictive behaviours, escapism, dissociation, low disciplined lifestyle, and other traits, qualities and characteristics about me that I wasn't owning, that was getting in the way of me having healthy relationship. I've confronted all that stuff now. And through that process, I'm now in a committed, satisfying, working, intimate relationship that's produced a child. I'm now a father. I no longer am addicted to cocaine, alcohol, and pornography. I was using those as escapism or avoidance or distraction or whatever. I now live a disciplined life. You know, I'm disciplined in most areas of my life.
Yes.
I now tell the truth all the time. I got out of my government job that was going nowhere and took myself on and wanted to stretch myself and started a company in the online education space. And I'm now passionate and committed. And all of this has come in the last 5 years through deep shadow work, not through necessarily psychotherapy or psychology, even though that's been an important part of my healing. And so part of the conversation I'm wanting to open up today is where psychology has its place and psychotherapy has its place. It was limited for me in terms of my total healing process, and there are other methodologies or processes that we can use that goes beyond where the psychology approach took me. And shadow work for me has so much to offer people. I've been doing it for 4 years now. My clients get remarkable results. So there's something inside shadow work that you don't necessarily find in conventional psychotherapy. And I find it remarkable. And Carl Jung came up with the concept of the shadow, and I think the world owes him a debt. And he died before telling us how to do shadow work. He said we needed to do it. He just didn't give us a manual. And I also find it startling that you can go and get a degree in clinical psychology from a university and not study Jung at all.
Mm.
And so there's something missing in conventional psychotherapy practice that doesn't bring in the concept of Jung and the shadow. And so this is a conversation. This is part of the reason why it was you that I wanted to be on this call. I've gotten deeper healing. And so the thing about psychedelics, and I was there for 15 years and I did deep dives, over 200 journeys with ayahuasca, ibogaine, psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT, DMT, LSD. You know, like I explored all of them because I was still new. I hadn't completed my healing process. And most of those psychedelic journeys I was going back for because I loved the beautiful mystical visions and the appreciation of the music. But what I got from it, if I can look at the one thing that I can take away from psychedelics, they stripped me of my mask and my persona. And they said, that's not who you are. That's covering a big part of who you are that you haven't yet confronted. And so behind the persona is the shadow. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years intensely, is exploring my shadows. So as a psychologist, as someone who understands the concept of shadow, as someone who's currently practicing as a psychologist, and someone who has an interest in psychedelics, can you affirm or acknowledge or pull out the thread that I'm wanting people to understand about why shadow work is a powerful tool, that if psychologists are not using it, maybe they could consider looking into it more deeply, and ought it be a part of conventional psychological practice to not dismiss the shadow when we're working with people with psychological wounds or traumas or injuries.
Absolutely. Wow. First of all, there's definitely an intention here to discuss these things.
Yeah.
And I was building up to talking about different forms of therapy and also coaching versus therapy and also the shadow work. But I wanted, and I definitely want to relate to that because I do think that the school of thought, the philosophies, again, the manuals in which we harness what we call, all of us agents of change, come out, and we're human too, and we follow protocols and procedures, and it becomes this engulfing way of how do you deal with your problems? Well, it depends what time in history you look at. And Jung, as you know, was Freud's best and most and closest student, and at the time they were practicing psychodynamic therapy. Now, over the years, psychodynamic has faded from a lot of psychology courses in universities. And we adopted something that corresponds more, I guess, with insurance companies and the idea that within 10 sessions of giving you cognitive behavioral therapy, we can address all your underlying issues. And that is absolutely ludicrous.
Thank you for saying so.
Without a question of a doubt, because the subconscious is real and it is super powerful. And I'm not saying that, psychodynamic approach was not completely dismissed. Some school of thoughts, like some places in the world, they still practice that quite a lot. I know it is well and alive in the US, it is well and alive in Israel, it's well and alive in all sorts of places. And here too, I'm seeing quite a bit of a movement from both psychiatrists and psychologists to dive into that type of work more and more, to learn more about psychodynamic, and also the shadow work is all included in it, of course.
Okay.
So it is dangerous, I guess is what I'm saying. The mentality, the philosophy, and the school of thought from which your therapist comes from, as you have so painfully learned, can not only be limited in their ability to help you, but can actually send you either make things worse or just send you in a completely wrong direction for what you seek. So it begs the question for me, like, what did you seek? What was your motivation to even follow that path that led you to find shadow work? I mean, you're talking about a developmental process there where you test and trial different things. In other words, why not, like many people do choose to stay as they are because change is based on fear, right? So like it's scary to change. What was your motivation to seek change to begin with? And how would you describe this process of being disappointed from one modality to another? I would really love to hear from you too, a bit more explanation about what coaching is. How did you find coaching? Because for many people, coaching just literally taken as is, somebody standing on the sidelines and going, you can do it, you can do it. But obviously there's much more to it. So I would like you to explain that, the motivation behind your journey, the courage to go through the journey, the disappointment from different modalities until you find coaching and doing the shadow work that you do these days.
Yeah. So I started by saying at 24, I was drinking heavily and I felt numb. And numbness was not, I couldn't tolerate living a life of numbness. Like my life was just a grey, flat line experience of zero emotion and just using alcohol to medicate that. And that felt unlivable. And as I said, I was, grateful and blessed that my mum paved the way for me. And I got access to psychotherapy where I finally accessed my emotions. That was definitely a pivotal point. And I got to scream and laugh and cry and rage and fear and all of it. And I'm like, this is a whole new world. But once I took the lid off that Pandora's box and all these emotions, I thought I was going crazy because I went from no emotions to all these emotions. Flooded. And that was hectic. But they were good at managing that. And so I came out of psychotherapy thinking that, okay, well, that was useful. And that's when I did my counselling diploma with that group. I skipped one bit here. It's worth mentioning. I said I was the youngest by 10 years in that group. And there was this interesting phenomena in the groups. Every Thursday we'd be there for 3 hours. And within a short period of time, the psychologists would call on me when they were stuck, when they were working with one of the clients, and they didn't know, what the process was, and they would say, Peter, what do you think's going on with this person? And I didn't know why they were calling on me at first, but then there was an invitation for me to give my opinion. So I'd say, oh, look, he's just, pissed off with his mother, or he's hurt by his father, or, he hasn't let go of his ex, or whatever was going on. I would just offer my opinion. And then they would take that and follow that line of inquiry, and something would happen over there with the client. And this became a semi-regular thing. They weren't calling on anyone else in the group, but they would be asking me, what did I think was going on? They saw that I had some capacity or facility for empathy, where I was able to map whatever the psychological process or emotional process was going on with the person. So I went from not having any emotions to be able to read other people's emotional states in a way that was useful for the therapist. And I remember feeling not knowing what to do with that, other than if they invited me, I would offer something, and they kept doing it for the whole program. I then went on to do a counselling diploma with that institution. When I graduated from that diploma, they went around and handed out our certificates. And I remember the psychologist saying to me, in 17 years of teaching this program, you're the outstanding graduate. So that also impacted me. I thought, oh, okay, there must be something about me that's unique or different. And they said, if ever you want to be a counsellor, we would love to have you, in our institution. And I did go back at one point and worked with them for a little while as a counsellor. And so that got me into, from there I went, around the same time I did my nursing training. I went into nursing to meet girls and discovered that there was something about studying health and anatomy and biology and psychology and all the rest of it that I really warmed to. So I stayed in nursing, and and having a 30-year career as a nurse. But I knew there was still more for me, and I went to America when I was 30, and that's when I was introduced to yoga. So I did a lot of yoga over there. I initially started yoga for physical fitness, but suddenly, spontaneously, I would go into meditative states and altered states during yoga practice, and realized, there's way more to this than just the body. This is the mind, this is the spirit, this is chakras, this is like interesting stuff. And so when I came back to Australia after 10 years in California, I was in a bookstore, and I saw this book. Down the spine of the book was this word Kundalini. And I just gravitated to it like it was a beacon. I had no idea what the word meant. I picked the book up, started to read the first few pages, and bought it, and took that book home. I still have that book. And I'm like, I need to do this Kundalini. So I was looking in the newspaper, and in the columns there was this small 2-line advertisement, Kundalini Yoga, and a phone number. And I called, and I met this woman. She was 70 years old at the time. I was 40. And I started doing one-to-one training with her. And I would go religiously. Every time she was offering a training, I would go. And I started doing Kundalini Yoga, Kriya Yoga, pranayama, like deep meditative yoga, not just, getting a good body. This was like spiritual process, and I went deep into it, and I started developing kind of supernatural experiences and what they call cities, and I would have cosmic orgasm, I would have spontaneous release of what they call Amrit, and so I'd be flooded with bliss, like just hours sometimes at a time of just this blissful experiences. I saw time stand still. I started developing these kind of supernatural sensorial experiences that were the consequence of doing this, consistent daily 2.5 hours Kriya yoga practice. And then the powers or the experiences started to get too strong, and I couldn't manage it. And so I thought, I need to go to India and find out who this guy Satyananda, who wrote this book, is, and I need to go and sit with him in an ashram, because I can't handle the experiences I'm having. So I went to India, and I sat in an ashram for 6 months, I remember going there, and the first day I got there, they said, "Oh, why have you come here?" I said, "Oh, I want to continue this Kriya Yoga and, enter into Samadhi." As though we won't be doing that, but you're welcome to stay for 6 months. And so I had a completely different experience. And I thought I was going to be in some beautiful Shangri-La retreat alongside a river somewhere in the mountains, and there was going to be lovely maidens walking around doing yoga, and I was going to be doing all this meditative, blissful stuff. And when I got there, it was in the worst part of India, Bihar, which even Indians won't go there because it's bandits and poverty, and they still practice infanticide where they kill their female children in that state. And Satyananda had gone there, and he went to the villages and said, "Give me your female children. Don't kill them, give them to me." And he raised 500 young girls inside that ashram and schooled them and clothed them. He was a great man, Satyananda Saraswati. And so I went there to his ashram, and it was interesting. I had no idea why I was going there. I thought I was going there to control my powers. And pretty soon, your whole day was scheduled. It was inside a military fort with 15-foot walls, with a locked gate and guards out the front, armed guards with razor wire over the top of it. And it was sparse living. There was no comfort. I shared a tiny room with 2 other guys. The bed I was on was hard. There was no mattress. There was no coverings. There was no pillow. The food was bland. There was no salt, no sugar, no flavorings. It was vegetables and rice, and as bland as could be. And every day I was either doing yoga practice or meditating or cleaning. My job was to clean the toilets, 6 squat toilets that 60 men had used through the night, and I would clean it in the mornings with a toothbrush and a brush and a bucket of water. And for some reason I was given that job for the first month, and they rotated around. And so, there was also working in the garden, and some days it was crazy, like some of the things you had to do. But I eventually got what was going on. They would get you to get these really, really dusty rugs that had been used for months, and then you would have to go into this room that someone had just finished cleaning, and then you had to belt the rugs to get all the dust out of them. And I'm like, really? They've just cleaned this room. Do as you're told. Just follow the program. So you'd belt all these rugs out, and you'd take the rugs back. Then another team would have to come in and clean the room that I just dirtied. And on Saturday mornings was when you would get an opportunity to leave the ashram and go into the village. And in the village, you had access to internet, telephone. You could buy some sugary treats. It was hedonism.
Rewards.
Oh, rewards.
Dopamine rewards.
Yeah, because there was none in the ashram.
Because so much for looking for bliss, right?
Oh, yeah.
Cleaning toilets.
Oh, yeah. That was my job. And it was brutal, but, I learned a lot about cleaning the toilets. And I now know that the most important person in the hospital is the toilet cleaner, not the doctor. Not the doctor. The toilet cleaner is the most important. Because if those toilets don't get cleaned, the disease is going to spread. And so a toilet cleaner it's a good practice. I'm glad I got it. I'll share a little bit what I got out of that. But going back to Saturday mornings was escaping the Spartan conditions of the ashram and going in to have some luxury. So then they would mess with you. And you got used to having Saturday mornings for the first 3 weeks. Then the 4th week, no trips to the village. We have special karma yoga. Karma yoga's the yoga of service. So no trips to the village this week. Karma yoga, we're meant to be excited about it. So this was when it was hot, like 40 degrees. And they got us to, rather than going to town, we had to do this special karmic yoga that was going to be good for us. And we had to get these rocks, pretty heavy rocks that were in the garden at one part of the campus, and walk uphill to another part of the campus, carrying these rocks and place them in another part of the garden. And that was our karma yoga, and it was supposed to be good for our evolution and our karma and all the rest of it. And so the following week, you were really looking forward to Saturday trip into the village because you didn't go the last week and you wanted to email your friends and all the rest of it. Announcement, no trips to the village, this more karma yoga. Okay, so my ego's starting to get really pissed off. And so they took us to where we'd got the rocks from the week before. And now we had to carry the rocks back down to where they were the week before and put them back.
Wax on, wax off.
So I'm now at the point where, okay, these people are fucking with me.
Yeah.
And what got driven up to the surface was, this is not about me at all. They're not interested in me, my yogic evolution, my conscious expansion, my comforts, my needs. Clearly this has got nothing to do with me, and I'm pissed. I thought I was coming to this beautiful, blissful experience, and they are just messing with me. And this complainer in me got driven to the surface, and it got louder and louder and louder. To my only experience was constant complaint. And it was becoming unbearable. I hated every aspect of the program. And I remember one day, and I was just driving my roommates crazy because they didn't have the same level of complaint. And one day I was looking at my program, and there must have been an error because there was a half hour in my program where I wasn't meant to be anywhere doing anything. And I'm like, oh, I get to do something, unsupervised time. And I recognized something, and I thought, this must be a trap. They're setting me up. So I went to the Swami. You always had a Swami that was in charge of your group. I said, Swamiji, I have a big problem. He goes, what's your problem, Peter? I have a half an hour in my program that's unaccounted for, and I'm afraid of it. I don't know what to do with it. He goes, good, I'm glad you brought it to me. We'll give you something to do. And I said, oh, by the way, I have this huge complainer inside of me. He goes, I know you do, Peter. He goes, good work. And I got at that point that the program wasn't about me, my desires, my comforts. And I was smacked in the face with my ego. And how all my ego wants is more comfort, more this, more that, more comfort, more this, more that. And it was the deafening complainer in me was an aspect of my ego. I said, oh, now I know why I'm here. And I said to Swami, I'm here to deal with my ego, aren't I? He goes, yeah, that's what you've come here for.
Yeah.
I says, oh, wonderful. I said, thank you. Thank you for giving me something to do with this half hour so I don't go and masturbate or seek some hedonistic pleasure somewhere or, ruin the process. And so at that point, I was all in. I'm just going to go with the program for the next 4 months. At the end of the 6 months, I'd booked my ticket, and the train ride from Bihar to Calcutta is overnight, 16 hours. And I'd already been on that train ride, and the trains in India, it's a whole nother experience. And so I thought, I'm going to spend money and I'm going to get a private room. Because, on my trip out there, I just had a general cargo, and I had to chain myself to my luggage and sleep with one eye open and shit in a squatting toilet and all the rest of it. It was horrible. I thought, I've got the money. I'm going to buy a private cabin. So I paid for the money for the private cabin. When the time come to, I'm like, free at last, free at last, free at last. And I ran down to the train station. I was so looking to sleeping on a bed with a mattress. Oh my God. And not with anyone else in the room. I was really looking forward for this trip back to Calcutta. The train pulled up at the station. I got on and I walked into my cabin. And there were 8 Indian guys in there sitting on my bed. And I was horrified. So I pulled out my ticket. They couldn't speak English. I'm like, come on, guys, you need to get out of here. Here's my ticket. This is my cabin. Out you get. I was just using, sign language because they couldn't understand me. And they just sat there smiling at me, not moving. Okay. So I'm like, I raised my voice. I stood over my shoulder, my ticket. I'm like, guys, this is my cabin. I'm here to sleep. You need to get up and get out of here. They just sat there smiling at me. And then I saw something. Because the train was packed. I mean, there were people on the roof.
Yes.
If I kicked them off that bed, they were going to have to sit on the floor. There was nowhere else for them to sit. And I saw, here's me with my Western culture, my money to buy a private, wanting to lord my status over these 8 Indian guys who were just taking the train. They probably take it every day. And they were sitting there, and I just saw my ego and the dominance play right in front of me. Maybe the 6 months I'd just been through helped me see it. And I finally got it. And I didn't want those guys to have to sit on the floor. So I looked at them and I smiled, and I got my ticket and I ripped it up in front of them. And I just calmed down. And when I did that, they moved 4 to the side and made a space for me to sit down. I sat down with them. And at some point they got off the train and I had the cabin to myself and I went to sleep. So what I got out of my yoga, my experience with yoga, I went in there looking for fitness. I discovered pranayama, meditation, deep spiritual practice. I went to the ashram. I confronted my ego and I dealt with my ego. And I had a big ego, pretty big ego to begin with. And so I needed a big program to soften it. But that was, at that point, I thought, okay, I'm done with the ego. And, there's all this thing, your ego is your biggest challenge in life. And, some people think, you got to kill your ego. You can't kill it. And so after that, I heard this word shadow, and that the shadow was like the opposite of the ego. What's this shadow thing? I thought I'd done all my work. I've dealt with the ego. And so I started becoming curious about shadow and started reading Jung. Discovered, the shadow's what's behind the ego. More work to do. I thought I'd done my work. And I parked it for a while, didn't know what to do with it. And then I got introduced to ayahuasca, the idea of ayahuasca. I was still kind of I've always been a spiritual seeker, and I didn't really find God in Catholicism, and I thought I'd find God in yoga, but I didn't relate to the Hindu gods. So I was still spiritually seeking. And then I heard of psychedelics and that they were a spiritual experience, and that if you take these compounds, you'll see God. Well, okay. So I had my first ayahuasca ceremony, and it was my first deeply spiritual religious experience, because I saw stuff I hadn't seen before, and I encountered realms that I imagined to be spiritual realms. They certainly weren't material realms. And it was a wonderful experience, and I was sold. And that led to 15 years of psychedelic experiences. And I remember going off to, regular ayahuasca journeys, and I noticed how some of these people that were serving the ayahuasca, you could look at them and think, they're further along their spiritual path than I am, because they're providing this sacrament, and they look like they know what they're doing, and they got their rattle and they're this and they're that. I was a little bit, what do you call that? Guru worshipping or something. Seeing them as shamans. Really, they're just people pouring ayahuasca and charging people money for it, a lot of them. But no, that's quite cynical and skeptical, but some of them are in there for the right purposes, some not so much. But I remember looking at some of these people thinking, okay, so psychedelics is about shadow work. It's about taking the mask off and dealing with your shadow. And then I noticed that some of these shamans were sleeping with the people, the participants. And I'm like, well, that sounds a bit shadowy. And, some of them were like, stealing from their employer. Or like I found out some of their other stuff that was going on, or they were in like really toxic relationships and things like that. I'm like, these people aren't really they're not getting the goods from this process. And it became clear to me that just because you do psychedelics doesn't mean that you're going to have a healing out of that. And I saw that what I saw in them was people who were pretending to be spiritual, but not necessarily not acting ethically or virtuously in their life, but having a persona of being that way. So I reckon the appearance. Yeah. I'm wearing the mask of the shaman.
Yeah.
But my shadows are still alive and well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I thought this was where you come to deal with the shadow, and I could see they weren't doing that.
Yes.
So I lost faith in some of the people that were providing that experience for me. I started drinking on my own. And I still had this problem of this shadow to deal with, because I dealt with my ego quite powerfully. It wasn't a problem to me anymore. But I still had this shadow. And so I started reading about the shadow, reading Jung about the shadow, recognizing it was all the stuff of me that I'd projected and, repressed and denied. And okay, well, how do I work with that stuff? And I didn't really have a guide or a mentor. And so I just went about it using psychedelics on my own. And then I discovered 5-MeO-DMT, and that's quite a powerful experience. And the more I did psychedelics, the more I discovered there were a whole side to me that I was avoiding. And the more I was avoiding it, because I'm not avoidant by nature, I like to confront things. And so when I recognized I was avoiding these parts of me, okay, I need to confront this stuff. I need to look at my addictions. I need to look at my lying. I need to look at my cheating. I need to look at my lack of commitment. I need to look at all these aspects of me. And I read about the shadow. I used psychedelics. I just went on my own path.
You hugged the cactus.
I hugged the cactus. Yeah, I didn't really have a mentor or a guide other than reading you. And, Jordan Peterson talks about the shadow in a pretty compelling way. So more recently, he was a mentor of mine, and he talks about, facing the monster within and all this kind of stuff. So I would go into psychedelic experiences asking as my intention to face my shadow. I want to see the dark night of my soul. Show me the monster in me. I need to face this and confront this thing. And I did years of that.
I think, I often find that initially people do get some sort of almost like it's a gift, like a glimpse into the blissful states. Like, I don't know if beginner's luck is the word or whatever. We get some sort of introduction and a seed is being planted. And there you go to yoga school looking for that bliss. And instead you clean toilets. Because for them, there is the very clear and obvious understanding that you cannot find it without first dealing with those shadowy, yucky bits. And the ego is very fond of spiritually bypassing and growing hair and dreadlocks and looking guru-like. And immediately you sometimes do see the gurus that are exploiting it for sexual or power or any type of intentions that are behind it.
Yeah.
And they haven't got rid of anything. In fact, it got much worse, and they're much more damaging now. So the root cause of evil in the world is the me and the mine, and the enemy from within. And so the ego doesn't love to come in contact with that, right? On the fullest scale of that, you have grandiosity or narcissism, where the suggestion to the narcissist that there's something wrong in their ways is often provoking rage, because they cannot contain that there potentially is an asshole inside,
yes,
or some sort of a behavior that is very self-centered and selfish. So how to come in contact with that, how to go and embrace the cactus, that's where I go, yeah, that is the true manifestation of that shadowy work, where you go and you see them in an honest, earnest way without running away.
Yeah. And for some reason, not for some reason, I think there's an astrological explanation. My sun is in Leo in the 8th house, and the 8th house is the house of Scorpio. And the 8th house is all about the occult, the hidden, psychology, death, sex, the mysterious. And so I'm predisposed astrologically to want to look behind the veil, what's behind things. And so the shadow is hidden by definition. And so that's where I'm going to look. I'm going to look at under every stone until I find what I'm looking for.
Yes.
And so that's the nature nurture. I was born with this predisposition to inquire and want to understand why people do the things they do. I was asking that when I was 5. I'm still asking that.
Yeah.
And the reason people do the things they do is, well, it's either coming from ego or shadow. A lot of it's coming from shadow. And so a lot of the things that motivate us, so a lot of our choices, actions, and decisions, often being made unconsciously, and we'll have self-limiting beliefs or certain blind spots or unhealed traumas or things that are hidden from us in the unconscious. And we don't know. We think we're making our decisions and choices in life based on our conscious grasp of reality, when in fact I've discovered a lot of the choices and decisions I've made in my life were coming from these hidden complexes or belief systems. And so I just feel blessed. I feel fortunate that I was born this way and that I've been driven to keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. Where else can I look? Where else can I look? And to the point where I've done a very deep dive in my own shadow and I've come clean. I've revealed all my shadows. I often share with my partner, I couldn't see before that I could be controlling or manipulative, selfish, and I never saw those traits in me.
Yes.
They're shadow traits.
It's hard to contain in the conscious mind.
Yeah, I couldn't.
It takes a lot of courage and a lot of willingness to hug the cactus, as I said, or turn on take a torch and go to the dark side of the moon willingly, repeatedly, shaving off these layers of our sense of self. These experiences you talk about, unity and bliss, they often incorporate not just the unity with all that is, but as a precondition, the death of the self. At least the temporary suspension of that sense of self we call I all the time, the small I. And it's daunting and it's frightening. And often in that path, there is periods of time where you have nothing to grasp for. It's very scary. And I'm just curious, would you ever do all of that without suffering? Can we thank suffering for that?
Oh, yeah, yes. Oh, yes, suffering.
And by direct link, our parents and their mistakes.
Oh, yes, suffering is a great motivator. And I think there's two motivations there. One is to minimize suffering, but the other one has been a spiritual quest.
Exploration.
Spiritual exploration. And by spiritual, I mean non-physical.
So curiosity for truth.
Sure, there's this world, but what's on the other side of the veil, if there is a veil? And so that got me looking into, well, what's behind the veil that defines me and my ego, and so it's a full self. For me, shadow work is just a full self-examination. Yeah. And I feel blessed to have done it. Yeah. Because there was no way, if I hadn't done my shadow work, that I would be in a committed relationship with a daughter. There's no way.
Yes.
I'd still have my addictions. I'd still be living an undisciplined life. I'd probably still be lying. Like for me, this is why I'm so grateful to shadow work, and it's why it's predominantly what I do now. And the people that come to me for shadow work coaching, they're similarly getting great results. And some of them tell me, like, look, I've been in therapy and I've done this and that and I've done plant medicine, but this is really making the big difference. So there's some cord or thread of truth that part of our healing process, definitely a part of my healing process, has, in fact, it's all contributed to it. But the icing on the cake, the cherry on the sundae for me has really been shadow work, and I came to it quite late in life. It was the last thing I came to. I don't know what else can be beyond shadow work. And interestingly, shadow work now has brought me back to God, which is interesting too, because I'd kind of let go of God, even though I was spiritually seeking. I had dropped my faith in a higher power or God. And having gone deep into the darkness, and it's, like you said, it's just like hugging a cactus, and it's very confronting, owning those bits of self that are not easy to own.
Wanting to run away every given moment and stay with comfort zone. Why not drink and drug and fornicate and just enjoy the hedonistic existence? It's much easier.
It is, and more fun. But, I guess after 58 years of doing that, I'd had enough fun, and I thought, what else is there, The next line of cocaine isn't going to be any better than the previous 400,
But discomfort always leads, that's another reason why we seek change, right? Discomfort.
Yeah. So what do you think, what's your take on working with the shadow? as a psychologist, are you working with the shadow when you're working with clients? And also, another thing I want to say, so how did I get into coaching? Let's go there for a second.
Yeah, I wanted to learn more and understand more about your view. Obviously, there was a certain journey that led you not just to shadow work, but to implement that type of support system within the framework of coaching. So if you can explain a bit, what is it all about? How do you see the difference from therapy?
Yeah. So I remember I'd been nursing for about 20 years already, and I was done with nursing, even though I ended up nursing for another 10.
Because we worked together in that fancy drug and alcohol service.
We did. Yeah. I was nursing.
You were an exceptional nurse, by the way.
Thank you.
People don't know that, but that was my first inspiration of how professional and committed you were and gifted in your job. It always felt so safe to hold a client when you were on shifts.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's my nature. I do put everything into my work. And I genuinely love people, and I'm supportive by nature, so that kind of comes easy. Not always easy, but it comes easy to me. It's a natural self-expression. And so I was tired of the regular kind of nursing. I worked emergency rooms, prisons, alcohol and drug rehab, this kind of thing. I remember sitting at a coffee shop with a friend of mine. I'm like, I need to get out of nursing. I don't know what else to do. I actually got online the other day and I looked up all other possible careers or occupations, and I went through them all, and not one of them appealed to me. And I don't want to do nursing anymore. I have no idea what to do. And he looked at me and said, you should be a life coach. I'd never heard the term. I'm like, a life coach? What's that? He said, you coach people and give them advice on how they should live their life. I'm like, well, that's a bit pretentious. I don't really think that my life is anything that remarkable that I should tell other people how they should live their life. He said, no, he says, you'll be a natural. He goes, you're great at it. He goes, you're already doing it. He goes, I've every bit of advice you've ever given me has been great. I've followed your advice and it's worked out for the better. And even my friends and I know this about you, and we talk about you like this when you're not around. That's how we see you, as someone who gives good life advice. I'm like, okay, well, I said, well, how do I become a life coach? He goes, you don't need to do any training. Don't go do any courses. He goes, just get a business card, print it up, you're a life coach, hang up your shingle and start, promoting yourself. Well, okay, that's a bit pretentious, but, I was looking, I didn't have any other options. So I thought, I'm going to give this a go. So I just started promoting myself as a life coach, and, it was very slow in the beginning, and, kind of fumbling through it, and clients would come to me and I'd give them some advice and, share and listen to their stories and listen for what was missing, or what, if they could do something differently, take a different approach, how would that, and, I just, slowly, I was still nursing at the time. It was very part-time to begin with. And then when I went and did that Landmark forum stuff, their coaches, they call themselves leaders, Landmark Forum leaders, but they're a coach. And I saw the power of coaching. These guys aren't psychologists. The guy that was coaching me used to be a cab driver in London for 40 years. And then he did this training to become this coach. And he was amazing. He moved a whole room of 150 people. Not just me, a lot of people had big transformations in that. I'm like, oh my God, there's this whole other thing out there that's not psychology that transforms people's lives. And so I did quite a few programs with Landmark, and I did their leadership program. Then they asked me to coach on their leadership program. Well, okay, so they see me as a coach because they're asking me to coach other people. And so then I coached on their leadership program. And then eventually I got to a point where I moved away from their organization. I didn't feel heart or spirit in it. It was very much about mental distinctions and looking at things from a different perspective and reframing things. But it was a lot of great stuff. I got a lot of really powerful stuff, and it helped me a lot. But I did develop some coaching skills while I was there. And I became better through doing their programs. I definitely cleaned up a lot of things. My integrity, I was more consistent with my word. I used to be really terrible at keeping my word. I became really good at keeping my word. I became more honest. I stopped lying. I just became a better version of myself through following it and developed some coaching skills. And my coaching clientele slowly over time grew. And through my trauma work, working as a trauma therapist and listening to hours and hours of people recount their traumatic life experiences and reframing their experience for them, like listening and accepting their reality, but also offering them another way to interpret their experience. And I used some of what I got from Landmark. I said, look, your trauma's not what happened to you. It's what's happening inside of you now because of what happened, what's happening inside of you now. And so I'd start to direct people more to what are the stories they're telling themselves. I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm like, well, if you've got that story, it's not going to work out well for you. So maybe you need to recreate your stories. And so through my trauma therapy, I started to bring in some coaching, not just sit there as a supportive listener, but when I identified and heard what was going inside of them now, because of their trauma, I said, well, look, it doesn't have to be this way. What if you approached things now like this instead of how you've been approaching these things? So I started bringing coaching into trauma therapy, and I discovered that the people were getting really good results. And I would even ask them, I'm like, was my coaching helpful or was it harmful to your experience? Oh no, it was way helpful. It made the experience more empowered and more embodied. And so I recognized that sometimes what people are coming for, it's not just the support of ear, it's not just sympathy or empathy. Sometimes people are wanting someone to guide them or coach them or mentor them. And so I quickly discovered, what I recognized was that when I've got my therapy or counseling hat on, I'm basically providing supporting listening and validating their experience of their past and all the emotional and psychological upsets of that. And that's about as far as I would ever get. And then I noticed that a coach, if you think about a greyhound bus is a coach, isn't it? So a coach is a vehicle that gets you from A to B. So that's what I am. I'm a vehicle that helps people get from A to B. So as a coach, I'm looking at where's the person now and where would they like to be? So they give me a list of goals. Okay, well, what's getting in the way of you having those goals now? And it's always them. So it's always you that gets in between you and what you want. So I started to see that, okay, I'm going to stop doing as much. I'm going to do less and less counseling and trauma therapy. I'm going to start doing more and more coaching. And so I'd ask people, where would you like to be? Oh, well, I'm here and I want to be there. And so then I would say, well, okay, what's stopping you from being there? And I would just, listen to their story, see where they're at, offer them a different way of doing things, offer them a different way of being, a different approach, a reframe. And generally people started to get better results. And then along comes shadow work. And so I start doing my own deep shadow process, and then I start incorporating shadow work into my coaching and take it to an even deeper level. And so my process has involved some therapy, some counseling, then coaching, then embracing coaching, then bringing shadow work into coaching. And now I feel like I'm the most effective I've been in terms of supporting people in their healing process.
Yes.
So that's, and I saw someone say once, anyone can be a coach. I think there's some truth to that, because there's something that you do very well. There's something, I think there's at least one thing that you can do really well. I think that's true for most people. So you can coach people in how to do that one thing well. And the other thing I like about coaching is it's an unregulated space.
Yes.
No license to lose.
Yeah.
So there's a freedom in that. And so I can do and say things that as a counselor I wouldn't do and say.
Correct. So it's much more direct. When I listened to you, my thoughts went to, first of all, it's much more direct. and it involves some form of intervention, like you're not just. So that's on the surface, but deep down inside, I think what you're talking about is almost like quantum physics, where the atom observed is influenced. In other words, the old idea that the therapist should be just an observer or as neutral as possible uh, is not true, in effect, because we influence just by the mere, just by the sheer philosophy and school of thought we come from, and by the way we guide clients. And what you're talking about, empathic listening, or Carl Rogers, the Rogerian, just empathic listening. I guess what I'm saying is that there is much more direct influence here, and it's called for. It's actually announced.
Some people are begging for it.
Yes.
Like, tell me what to do.
Tell me the truth. Tell me what it is.
Tell me what I can't see about myself, that if I could see, I could make a difference in my life.
Yes.
And so what we can't see is hidden. I think because I was willing to reveal all the things that are hidden in me, and I reveal them to my clients. I'm an open book to my clients. And I think that's helpful to them too, because as a therapist or a counselor, there was this arm's length distance thing, and there's this disconnect. And I notice with my clients, sometimes it's when I'm the most real and most human and most vulnerable with them that some of the biggest shifts occur. And so that's another thing about coaching that I like, is that I'm real, I'm vulnerable, I'm raw, but also I can let people know, look, I've been there. I haven't been everywhere. Like, there's some things I can't coach people in if I haven't had that experience, but I'll,
yes,
I can only take people as far as I've gone myself.
Yes. Whereas traditional psychology used to kind of be trying to be instrumental and helpful in leading the clients to unravel, to discover all these things by themselves, not to be told, not to be taught, not to be directed as such. It's an interesting thing, because often over the years I've seen different types of therapists, and I think you and I discussed this. It's like the metaphor of the 5 blind men being asked to describe an elephant, and because they're blind and everyone is touching a different part of the elephant, everybody's seeing something else or describing something else. And so I sometimes think in talk therapy and in all these modalities and all the schools of thoughts, are we like that too? And would it be possible for you to get to where you are without first being either, getting what you needed from a certain modality? Like you said, there was an emotional purging, but it wasn't enough. And so it was still a necessary stage, a phase of your psychological, spiritual, and emotional history in which it made you continue to seek. And perhaps it was that readiness too. It was that readiness, and I think that's a key word in trauma work, right? Is that stability and safety are required first. And so you were ready for much more directness and approach in your life that led you to seek that kind of, to offer that kind of support to others. And I can vouch in my journey too, that I studied psychology initially in the 90s, and then discovered psychedelics as a young man in his 20s, and lo and behold, it was counteracting a lot of what I studied. That diving into the sense of self and enhancing that sense of self and dealing with that sense of self all day long, and with a stroke of a few micrograms of a drug, all of that goes out the window to some extent. And you go, what is this? So then it makes you seek different modalities in psychology, psychoanalysis, this, that, and the other. There's so many. There's so many. And of course, you can tap into existential psychology, transpersonal psychology, some of which are trying to engulf more of that. And then you develop that CBT. I think that CBT, again, is a hijack of the medicalized system. There's nothing wrong with it per se. It's very useful for some people. But when you talk about complex mental health problems and rich, so to speak, histories of trauma, that CBT work is not going to cut the mustard, not to that extent. And when Medicare is limiting people for 10 sessions a year, and there's no such quick fix. We're complex creatures with conflicting wants, needs, and desires, with subconscious processes that are driving our behavior and emotional states. There's much more investigation that needs to happen there. And I love what you say about not only the direct approach of coaching, but also the authenticity of bringing yourself as. And so coming from the field of addiction, I often recognize that the aftercare is lacking, that we would provide this really artificial environment in a rehab, and people will do whatever work they do and detox and all that. But when they go back, they're meeting their old environment, old stresses, old family dynamics, and all of it gets activated, including subconsciously primarily. And they go back, they fall back disillusioned. Post-sanctuary days, I also said to myself, I'm tired of this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm tired of this. Then got a call from a client in the US asking me to support their son. And intuitively, I don't know how, I agreed and dived into what appears to be like coaching. I took them on a journey, traveling the world, and this was a young man. So we combined surfing and stuff like that in that. And of course, it's not for everyone. And I thought to myself, what am I doing here? Because I had to remove the head of the psychology. Clearly, if you're not sitting within the framework of clinical boundaries, 1-hour sessions and all that. And we went on this trip, and I remember I was suddenly called in. Me as a human being, there was no escaping. It was 24/7 on the roads. You get tired, you get upset.
Yes.
Your
Can't hide behind
your shitty stuff comes out, and so does theirs. So psychology kind of enabled me to see what not to do and what to be careful and when to assess when people are either stable or safe enough to do trauma work.
Yeah.
Combined with psychedelic work, combined with that coaching approach where you are actually more direct and you intervene and you call people out when it is like that. Things you would never, ever dream about doing in a therapy room. It just, but you've been educated to that it's not safe. Simple as that.
I think I've answered my own question, because one of the questions behind the whole reason for this discussion is I've had this: ought we bring into the psychologist's repertoire of tools shadow work coaching? And this was my thought, and I actually sent off some emails to about 25 different therapy colleagues and friends that I know. And I think I got one response coming back and saying, I might be interested. I thought, okay, there's not much response to that. And then I'm just thinking now, maybe they're not good bedfellows. Maybe they're separate kind of entities, and that shadow work coaching is its own modality that has its own set of parameters and rules. While it lacks regulation, which I like. I like that it's not regulated and there's no license for me to lose. I'm just coaching people. I'm not doing psychotherapy. I'm not doing medical intervention. And so it doesn't come under all those restrictions and licenses and regulations that when you're actually doing a medical, process, because, then you've got a license to lose. And so this is another reason why. But we're still working with the unconscious mind. So I thought it fit into psychology.
Yes, but I see two problems there for which we will not practice it. The first one is, of course, anxiety-driven lack of skill, because we're not being taught. I mean, we do these days. If you look at the modern training of cognitive behavior therapy and so forth, you don't do that kind of, you don't do that kind of training. And so you just don't know what to do, or you don't know about it at all. And so it's anxiety provoking to think about doing it. And the second layer, more important, is that I think it's one of those types of approaches that unless you have done that yourself, which is why sometimes you look at psychodynamic training and it is long. It's long. It's like quite a few years of grueling psychoanalysis yourself. You have to go through it. And so it's something that you have to embody in order to become so-called a skilled practitioner in being able to do that work.
Yeah.
So that would be a good reason why people will avoid it.
Yeah.
Of course, whether it's necessary, 100%. That's what I meant before, that I find even in some of the mainstream psychologists and psychiatrists, the request or the intention to go back to more psychodynamic training, and to, I hope, in that training, dive a bit more into that stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think they belong in separate dimensions, or separate categories, and makes sense, because I didn't know the answer to that, and that's why it was part of the exploration of this conversation. Where do we put shadow work coaching? Because I don't know how many. It's a few. I've done an online search. There's a handful of other people out there promoting themselves as shadow work coaches.
Yeah.
But really only a handful. And I looked at some of their stuff, and some of it's similar to my stuff, and it looks like some other people out there are doing good work as well. And I'm on this path. Like, I'm not deviating from this path. I feel like I've really found my calling, and I love what I do, and I love to see the results people get. And so, maybe I can drop my idea that it dovetails into a psychologist's repertoire, and just stay in my own lane, and continue to promote it as its own thing.
In my ideal version, we collaborate, all of us, and perhaps it's preparedness and readiness. I mean, some of the clients you described that got a lot of it were disillusioned or disappointment by the lack of desired change in them from previous modalities. But just like you, perhaps, that stage of early 20s and emotional purging and typical psychology work was necessary to find more stability and strength in you.
Yeah.
To then be able to approach deeper layers and deeper shades of ourselves.
That's a good point. And, I've had clients that have been with me 10 years. And I had one on this morning on my podcast who's been with me 6 years, and she just did her shadow work last year. But she's been with me doing counseling and, trauma therapy and other stuff, to ready her to look at her shadows. And so, I think, I'm 63. I've been on this path for 40 years. So, and like, there's been steps along the way, and I think we've outlined a lot of them. And then that's what I wanted to do, was kind of map my healing journey. And I can say now, like, I'm pretty much good. I'm pretty much healed. Are there going to be challenges coming my way? Sure. Am I deeply impacted by my traumas? No. Have I integrated a good deal of my shadow? Yes. Was that the best thing I ever did? Yes. Am I happy with my life? I am. Do I love what I do? I do. So I feel like my journey's, not complete, but pretty well attended to. And it's been a lifelong journey, and it's been mostly where I've put my energy in my life, is to healing my hurts.
Yeah, I agree, and I see it in you. And I think it will be beautiful for, again, isn't that the movement of the me and the mine and the egos and this, like my modality, their modality, human beings stumbling in the darkness, trying to find a way. And for me, ideal work is that sometimes it's necessary to a multidisciplinary team approach. It's necessary for people to do the ABCs.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And cognitive behavior therapy and whatnot. You find deeper trauma. You go deeper with other modalities. When people are feeling more, ready, then they can seek that shadow work, psychedelic work, and so forth. And that indeed is, like the hype around psychedelic interventions these days has led to more and more practitioners who sometimes do not have that full world view and full life experiences that you have. And therefore, at least in my work, I do see quite a bit of dangerous work being done, where it's all nice and fine to go and immediately, like open people up in an instant, like a weekend instant trauma work through psychedelics. But there is a lot of stuff that comes after that. And we are all ought to be careful, because as we conclude, the philosophy, the mentality, the manuals with which therapists come with, if they're not aware of their own biases and their own unresolved issues, we can often do damage.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, though, about the most powerful psychedelic experiences you had, and the most recent one. And I guess I'm aiming at, how is it to become a father at 63? Tell us about it, you brave man.
Yes, I think all the other things were just preparing me for my deeper spiritual work, which is to become a father. And it's interesting, when I was in the ashram.
Forget the bufo, right? Have a
Oh,
child.
yeah, right. Yeah, when I was in the ashram, I even shaved my head and, started wearing the little dot here and malas, and put on the dhoti and, just was, flirting with the idea of a monastic lifestyle, just going deep into. And, I had conversations with the swamis there about it, and they said, look, there's two paths, left and right-handed, Varma Marga, and I forget what the other one is called, but it's either the life of the monastic recluse, and you can reach the highest spiritual enlightenment through that path, or just go have a family. And you'll also reach the highest, neither path is better than the other. And so I've done my spiritual quest and my ashrams and psychedelics and all that stuff, and now I'm seeing there's plenty of opportunity for my spiritual journey to continue through the unfolding process of my daughter's flowering. And I feel blessed to have done the work that I've done, because I think it's going to minimize the negative impact I have on her. That's my hope. And I'm fairly confident that, I'll be a good father to her. It's got its challenges. Oh, the one I didn't see coming was the old me's got to die for the father to be born, and I'm grieving some of that old guy. And free time, what's that? I used to have more free time than I knew what to do with. And now, if I'm not working on my project, I'm caring for my child. So, I mean, we still get to the beach occasionally here and there and that, but certainly it's been confronting and challenging, but so deeply rewarding. And as I said before, in terms of the spirituality of having a child, it brought me back to God. And I've shared this before more than once, but, when I saw the bump in Beck's belly for the first time, I really got that that's not my child, that's God's child. I'm not smart enough to make a human in another human. I can donate the seed, but that's it. And I got that, that's a bigger responsibility to raise God's child than my child. And I continue to see her that way. And I see that, and it's impacted my thoughts and theories a little bit, because I see that we are born whole and complete and innocent, and we come from the divine, and we're in, she's divine. There's nothing that's not okay about it. And I have this, how I pitch shadow work is that we create our own ego and we create our own shadow, and that we're responsible for our creations. And so we're responsible for our ego and we're responsible for our shadow. And how we do that is that we are born whole and complete, but then as we grow from infant to adult, we make decisions about what we are and what we're not. And all the things we decide we are become our ego. And all the things we decide we're not become our shadow.
Interesting.
And so we disintegrate. We're born whole and complete. And we disintegrate into ego or persona and shadow. And that's why it's called shadow integration. Because what I'm doing is what I've attempted to do, and I believe I've done it to a significant degree, is take those two disintegrated parts of myself and amalgamate them back together and integrate that part of me that I was disowning and not taking responsibility for and avoiding. And it now feels like it's a part of my total persona. And that's, for me, what the integration part of shadow is. It's like I had a twin at birth, and I got separated from my twin at birth, and I've reunited with that twin, that part of me that I was rejecting is now back with me. And I have no qualms about owning all my shadows now. I mean, sure, there may still be some I'm not seeing, but if people point them out, I'm willing to look at them and own them and take responsibility for them. And so I look at my daughter as whole and complete, and she's going to go on this process too. And she's going to make decisions about who she is and who she's not. And I'm curious from my position. It's informing me a little bit, and I can run this by you. So I'm conducting this social experiment on my child. You can report me to child services. I want to try and raise her shadow in. And what I mean by that is that when aspects of parts of her that I might want to have her repress, I want to watch out for that. I don't want to teach her to repress too many things, so particularly things like aggression. You know, little girls make, that's not kind, that's not polite, you shouldn't be behaving that way. I don't want to suppress any natural expressions of my child. I may be making a mistake doing this. What I want to do instead is give it a name. So if she's showing aggression, I'll say that's aggression. What you're experiencing there, how you're being, how you're acting, that behaviour is consistent with I've got aggression, I've got a lot of energy, it wants to move, it's forceful, it's dynamic. That's aggression. You don't have to suppress that. Could be good to channel it or discipline it. And so me and my partner are already talking about putting her in jiu-jitsu at 3 years of age, because rather than suppress aspects of ourselves, we just need to know what to do with that aspect and to channel that. I don't want her to block herself off from organic, natural suppressions of who she is as a being. I don't want her to create too much of a shadow and have to do the amount of shadow work I've done. I want that to be a more organic experience for her, where she knows, oh, I could say I'm not this, or I could accept that I can be this way at certain times.
The potential to manifest into all.
Yeah. I want her to recognize that all parts of her are welcome, at least at some time or place. There's a time and a place for everything. And so,
yes, because aggression by default is about protection.
Yeah.
When it goes toxic and over the top, it's of course becoming very problematic. But as a biological mechanism in our bodies, is about protection. You protect your boundaries. There's a predator coming for you, and if you don't fight or fly, you're going to be gone. You know? So,
and I may not always be here to protect her. And so the way I'm going to protect her is to teach her about aggression and how to channel that. Yeah. And we all have a monster in us. And, I've learned to discipline my monster. And that was also part of it. I never used to recognize the monster in me. I was a weak pacifist at one point in my life, particularly when I was doing this yoga and meditation. I became impotent.
Because your ego wanted to be a good person.
Yeah, right? I was denying that there's a killer in me, a protective killer in me. And so now I'm very much aware of that part, but it's a disciplined monster. And, some people don't discipline their monster, and their monster wreaks havoc in their life. And that's the story of Frankenstein. If you've got a monster that you've created, and we all have one, our shadow, we all created our shadow, it can be a monster. And if you don't take responsibility for it, it's going to wreak havoc in your life. Frankenstein. I think we might wind up there.
Yes, I need to wee.
I can imagine. It's been a long conversation. Thank you for your generosity and indulging me, sharing my story. I'm glad we did it. I feel I can put that baby to bed now. And I really appreciate your generosity and walking with me on that journey.
Thanks, Pete. It's been a pleasure.
And next podcast, we'll talk about anything that you want to talk about.
As long as I don't get in trouble with my big mouth.
Okay.
All right.
Thank God I got an editor.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers.